In the interest of time, I think I'll just press on. When you see my presentation, you'll realize why I've pressed on anyway. The first thing is, in interest of, again, time and my new learned diplomacy, I'll intend to not use all of my allotted time, or at least that is the intent. But us Brits tend to go on a bit, so please stop me if I go on too long. I'm sure you will, Mr. Chairman. So our topic, which looks at both hard and soft power, it's really what we've all been talking about for the last few days, and of course the discussion we had with some of our guests who were sitting alongside was a very profitable discussion and went on almost missing our lunchtime. So really profitable time was had by all. The first thing I'd say about the hard and soft power piece is, of course, and we all know this, there is no panacea, there is no simple solution. There are a few themes, though, that come across it all, such as the requirement to reduce the fear factor, the requirement to increase public resilience, and, of course, that we must go from being reactive to proactive. For this audience, and bear in mind we've spent the last couple of days discussing it, I don't wish to unpick the definitions or indeed analyse the hard and soft power piece in particular. I'm taking, for the purposes of this presentation, a simplistic view that hard power equals military force, soft power equals influence, and that the demarcation line between the two is somewhere along the line of the use of force. What is worth considering is how that is balanced. How it's balanced, who balances it, and of course this is where governance is key. But alongside governance, leadership is fundamental. Of course, the global context is very important too. The power politics and the shift from west to east. According to Professor Nye, who is a learned professor in this area with soft and hard power, there are two further descriptions that are worth discussing. One is power diffusion, where the states are now being challenged. The old Westphalian model is being challenged by the transnational nature of the violent extremism in this case, but also by many other forms of terrorism and the like. And then also the second is, as I've highlighted, the west to east shift, or the Asia rising, with power transition. Professor Nye went on to talk about the importance of soft power and cultural values, that hard power, as we've discussed, in the use of violence, but also a new concept, that of smart power, where it's a combination of the two, but also with a contemporary perspective with technology and social media, etc., laid on top. That increased communication that just transcends all boundaries. General Mehta yesterday mentioned about the defeat of the LTTE by hard power. But I assume, of course, that while it was predominantly hard power, there were, of course, soft power effects going on. And this was confirmed within our group. The important thing, therefore, is the balance. What is the balance? Is it 20-80, 80-20, 50-50? And of course, we all know that it's dependent on the situation. What is the sequence? An important point came out in our discussions of sequencing. Is it hard then soft? Is it soft then hard? Or indeed, is it both in parallel? And that's what we determined that it is in almost all situations. But the key that was brought up by the General in our discussions was that of synchronization. Synchronization is key, and the ability to fine-tune, to turn on and turn off the hard and soft power and the individual effects within hard and soft power as and when we see fit. And the Boko Haram conflict in Nigeria was discussed in terms of how it was felt within our group that was very much a sort of a 90-10, or indeed possibly even 100-0 for the hard over soft power in terms of that sequencing. They didn't feel that perhaps in that situation, until the hard power effects have won over, have been defeated, that we could move on to mop up with the soft power. But legitimacy and context also count. And if I use the 2003 Iraq invasion as an example, we all are aware, I'm sure, of the lack of support from the global community, and indeed with our own countries for those that were part of the initial coalition. So that legitimacy is key, as is the context in which whatever the operation is that is being fought. The next very important point we came across was that of which the professor mentioned extensively in his presentation, was that of listening, of sensing, of understanding. The understand function really is the key. Whether we're looking at the LTTE or whether we're looking at Iraq, we must understand the environment and that context, that global context in which we're operating. Every situation is different. And again, I know you've not heard that for the first time now. But it's also not just state actors. If we think of ISIL or IS are using hard and soft power on a daily basis. They've exploited social media. They've exploited the shock, and I'm sure there's not a person in this audience who has not seen the videos that resonate with the orange suits and the beheadings that have been going on, that has created that fear factor, while at the same time committing to hard power. We must also be aware that hard power creates the victim space. We again heard that in the presentation this morning. But the very use of hard power itself increases the support, increases the enemy's ability to use their own soft power, and indeed increases recruitment. Soft power is in the mind of the adversary. That is the target. Our target is not what we perceive it to be, it is in the psyche of our adversary. So what of defense? In defending against hard or soft power, we can also use soft or hard power to counter it. We can use soft power against smart power. Again, the context, the situation is different. We must look at the specific effects for each situation and context, such as the removal of propaganda in any particular conflict could be countered by the use of hard power. Kinetic effect, removing the source of the cyber or social media effect that is creating, albeit that is much more difficult to achieve. But also, perspective is important. Through which lens are we seeing, and through which lens are we analysing the situation? Post-World War II, there was a requirement for a rules-based order. Today, things have become very transnational in nature. And I've already mentioned violent extremism is just one example that challenges this order and by its very nature crosses all of our boundaries. We must therefore seek contemporary, updated rules-based order in which and to which we can all sign up. Easier said than done. But this greater vision touches on another point that was brought out extensively both yesterday and today, and that is alternatives. The narrative that is out there must be countered with a counter-narrative. We'd heard that alternative narrative is probably more appropriate. But either way, our own narrative must go against it. And the way we felt within our group after much discussion was along with the professor's view, which is by the creation of this greater vision that will allow the target audience to understand where they and we are trying to get them to, and thereby hopefully facilitate that use of the alternative narrative. The professor gave us an excellent example, but outside of the military domain, where vaccinations were given in the US, and it was perceived, the perception was that those vaccinations were creating autism in children. And interestingly, when a counter-narrative was put out there, indeed all that counter-narrative did was support the original narrative. Success was really only gained through a media campaign which focused on this visionary style of alternative narrative. And in this particular case, they promoted a vision of healthy children, from education to exercise, but at the same time throwing in this narrative that these inoculations were a good thing and looked after the health of the children. And in so doing, through this, if you like, maneuverist approach, actually created the effect that they wanted to, much better than the counter-narrative did in the first place. The most effective alternative should come from within. It should come from within the target audience psyche, and we must remember that. It is not our own, it is in that of our adversary or the target audience we are seeking to influence. We must also look more broadly at other numerous factors that exist, from political, military, economic, social, and informational. Where economic interdependence exists, it assists parties to find a mutually agreeable solution. Major General Noble was part of our group and illustrated with a very good economic example from ISIL and Iraq, which explained the synchronized, parallel use of hard and soft power. That refined use, the ability to turn it on and turn it off in the campaign that he was discussing, in which IS fighters were lulled through this campaign by a vision of how they could fit back into their communities. They were offered that alternative to fit back into their communities. They were assured that there was a place for them back in their community, should they wish to put down their arms and choose that option. It was, of course, in parallel with the hard consequences that were to follow and the combat operations that ensued. But these individuals, this target audience, was picked out against the internationals. It was bespoke, it was just about them, explaining how they were being, on the negative side, hard done to, they weren't getting paid as much, that death was the only alternative if they didn't seek this option. But as I say, from a positive point of view, offering them an alternative, a vision where they would join back into society from which they'd originally come. And my understanding is that that operation was very successful. So we have to be maneuverist in this approach as we do in our combat operations. The bottom line, though, as the Admiral said, as our keynote speaker at the start, everyone has a stake. It is not time for us to bury our head in the sand. And as he quoted, it's time for all hands on deck. Thank you.